Hi, I'm here in an abandoned plot of land that is right outside Columbia, and you can see it used to be some sort of factory. There's a bunch of others around. There's also a boat factory right on the other side of the road. And the problem with a lot of these places, these abandoned factory plots, are that they are not regulated. So often there's chemicals that are left behind or scraps of metals that are left behind that until they're sold, they just sit here. And often they're in low-income neighborhoods and just sitting there. And so what you can do is you can go to the EPA's hazardous waste site and you can see what kind of things are around and whether they had any incidents. So let's see, for example, I want to find out what this place was like that I stopped at. And I'm going to go to Google Maps. For example, you can also use Google Earth, but it's really easy here. And you just enter the address. I've already entered it and marked it. So it's right here. This is where I was. And you can see that it's really nice how you can see the area and exactly what is around. Right here, this is the satellite view. And this, let it render for a second. Okay, now it's sharp. I was stopped right here in this parking lot and when I took that video, and you can see this plot of land is the abandoned plot where the factory used to be. This building has been demolished, so it's not there anymore, but there used to be, you can see corroded metal. There's some sort of tank here with liquid water or something. There are a couple of retention ponds here. I don't know what's in them or what they're for, but this is what looks what they are. And then you can see that there's a creek running very close to this. You can also see that this area has several steel factories. So there's one, and here are a couple others. This is all a steel factory, rebar. There's some trucking. There is a boat manufacturing right here. There is a tire service here. Okay, so all these places are potential sources for contamination or environmental hazards. And you can zoom out and look at it a little further because all this is really going to be the same watershed, it's all sharing the same water. There's two big quarries right here, right on either side of the Congaree River. You can see two big ones and the concrete factory right there. So, you know, all these things are definitely factors that will contribute to the air quality and the water quality in this area. Okay, so let's go back to where I was right here. And I wanted some information about it. So we're going to go to the Environmental Justice, the EPA EJ screen, which is Environmental Justice Screen mapping tool, which is going to help us figure out what's around. Now, I need to point out here that in 2025, the EJ screen environmental justice mapping tool was taken down by the government, and you can no longer access it through the EPA website. Luckily, before they took it down, the Public Environmental Data Partners, which is a group run primarily through Harvard, recreated the entire mapping tool, and they posted in a different website. So you can access that through tinyurl.com new EJ screen. And it will look exactly the same. So the instructions that follow, I recorded using the old EJ screen, but it should look exactly the same as this recreated version. So I'm going to go into this map and find the location where I was at. And I know the plot where I was is right here on this side. You can see that this base map is nice because it shows the wetlands that are around. So this property, these factories are really very, very close to the wetlands right here and the stream. You can see. And remember, you see it goes right through the property actually. And remember that all the waters are connected. So this is going to be connected to the drinking water, to the water we use in different processes. So, okay, so now what we want to do, and you can also switch in this map, you can also switch back and forth between the satellite view and the regular view. Okay, so now what we're going to do here is that we're going to go to environmental justice indices, and you can click on these indices have been calculated by multiplying the environmental factors. Okay, so any kind of like pollution and hazardous sources. Okay, so all this pollution like particulate matter, ozone, diesel, air toxics, cancer risk, lead paint, all these things that are environmental hazards. and they have multiplied them by the socioeconomic factors. Okay, so socioeconomic factors, things like income level, level of education, people of color, older people, vulnerable populations. Okay, so what you get is this index, and it takes into account both the environmental factors and the socioeconomic factors. So let's say that I want to know, okay, I'm going to look at the respiratory hazard index, okay? And you can see this is where, this is the cross over here, or this area right here is where we are. And if you zoom out, you can see that using the key over here to the right, this area is going to be at the 95 to 100th percentile compared to the rest of the country in terms of the exposures of air toxic respiratory hazards. It doesn't get any higher than that, okay? And you can see that even around it, all this orange and yellow is very, very high. It's above 80%, this whole area. Now, if you can unclick that, and then you can click on something else. For example, let's say wastewater discharge. And again, very high percentile, 95th to 100th percentile in this whole area. Okay, so this doesn't only indicate that this area is where there is most environmental hazards. It's kind of linking. It's the intersection between these environmental hazards and the socioeconomic factors. So these are vulnerable populations that are exposed to the most environmental hazards. Okay, so what you're going to do now to try this tool out is you are going to, there is a link on As You Learn to this Padlet. And what you're going to do is you're going to add a sticky note with information about a site that you look up using this EJ screen. Another way that you can do it is, like, you can go to reports, okay? And you can draw an area or drop a pin. So you can either one, whichever one works for you. I am going to draw an area because I want to get these neighborhoods over here. So I'm going to, all you do is you click it, and you create the area you want. And if you want to drop a point, you just click and point. I'm going to draw this, I'm going to call this around empty, around site, around the site of interest. For example, you can call it Boone, you can call it your hometown, you can call it anything you want that you're looking at. And then I'm going to say explore reports. It's very simple. And then here it's going to tell us, it's going to give us a lot of information. So you can see, okay, well, I'm looking here, the environmental justice indices, they're all above 50%. So every single one of these in this area is going to be over 50th percentile compared to the rest of the USA, okay? And we're looking at the highest are going to be air toxics, and they're also very close to the Superfund side, which we're going to talk about in this lecture. You'll see it a little bit later, okay? But you can see that they're all extremely high. You can also go to pollution and sources to see what are the main sources of pollution. So it's going to be air toxics and hazardous waste, things like that. Okay, and then the socioeconomic indicators. So you can see that most people are going to be low income, 75% people of color, not a lot of non-native speakers. Okay, not a lot of kids in this area, but you can see that the level of education is pretty low. 92% have less than a high school degree. Okay, so once you have explored the EJ screen map, and you have picked the place, and you have generated a report, what you're going to do is you're going to take a screenshot of either the map or the bar chart that your report generated, and make sure it is a proper screenshot, not just like a photo of your computer. And once you have a screenshot in a blank document somewhere, type up a short paragraph about what you found out for that specific place, for the specific environmental justice index variable that you looked at. And then you're going to go to the voice thread. It's called EJ Screen Exercise. And you're going to see something like this. And what you have to do is you're going to go here to the right corner where you see that it says Add Slide Media. You're going to click on the plus sign. You're going to upload. I'm going to upload this from mine. It's a desktop right here. And I would, this one is my screenshot of my EJ screen mapping tool. Right here, it shows up as the next slide, so slide number 3. And that's my slide. And then notice that it is neatly cropped. You don't see a bunch of my menus and stuff and the rest of my desktop around. And then you're going to go here to the left where there's this little plus, another plus sign to make a comment. And you can post a comment either as text, voice, or video, talking basically about what you found out about that Environmental Justice Index. So I'm going to click on it, and I have already copied from my document the paragraph. It doesn't have to be too long. I'm going to save it, and you'll be able to see it here. And in the gallery down here, you should be able to see everyone's slides and their comment on each slide. So all you need to do is post your screenshot, and along next to your screenshot, you're going to post your comment, and then make sure you submit the voice thread. Okay, and that's it. And if you run into any problems or have any questions, just let me know. Hi, we continue with lecture 4, which is part of chapter 17 in the textbook. And today we will cover environmental justice. Environmental justice is a term that you have probably heard around campus. It is frequently in the news. There are many events centered around environmental justice with environmental justice as a focus. There's many advocacy groups that promote environmental justice. But what does it really mean? So based on the definitions that other students in this class have given in the past, it seems that there's a lot of misconceptions around what environmental justice actually means. Many students believe that it means giving a voice to the environment. So as you can see here, some of the definitions, the first one, the ones that are not highlighted, they really focus on the conservation of the environment. So advocacy for preserving and conserving the environment, or making sure that the environment is treated correctly, taking steps to keep the earth clean, fighting for the environment, making sure environmental laws are implemented. I especially like this one, world peace. So even though all of these are really important and they do play a role in environmental justice really focuses on people. It does not focus as much on giving a voice to the environment as it does to giving a voice to people. So making sure that every community has equal access to environmental benefits, and that not one community is burdened more than others because of environmental issues. So I thought that the definitions that are highlighted were the most accurate in this group. So fixing environmental concerns for everyone and bringing justice to minority groups. And in the bottom, environmental justice is the study of how environmental problems affect certain groups of people, and making sure that they don't disproportionately affect those who are poor. And at the very end, distributions of environmental benefits and burdens. So this is really what the definition of environmental justice is. And as Majora Carter puts it, she's an activist, environmental justice means that no community should be saddled with more environmental burdens and less environmental benefits than any others. So this is what environmental justice entails. And I found a quick video that I'm going to play because I thought it did a good job explaining the concept.
Okay, so this is a city. Here are all the people living in it, people of all different colors, ages, wealths, and incomes. Except they don't all live together in the same place. They're separated into different parts of the city by what color they are, what language they speak, and how much money they have. And those different parts of the city look quite different. The parts that are whiter and wealthier tend to have green spaces, grocery stores with nutritious organic food, and of course some money to buy it, and are often far away from pollution-emitting freeways. The parts that are poorer and more diverse tend to have industrial sites, heavy-duty diesel-polluted ports and highways, and hazardous waste, all things that the city relies on to run properly, but that heavily pollute the air and water. And even if they had those grocery stores with nutritious organic food, most residents there couldn't afford it anyway. How did this happen? Well, this segregation can be traced back to race-based zoning and housing policies, but it wasn't always as deliberate as plain old racism. Some separations can simply be traced to poor land use planning. And as a result, these residents of the same city live very different lives. Say the city realizes it has an emissions problem. It comes up with a plan to reduce air pollution, plant more trees to suck up the carbon, or start a cap and trade program. But those trees get planted in the neighborhoods that are already green, and the factories that are spewing toxins into the air just buy more carbon offsets and keep spewing their toxins. The benefits of these programs are enjoyed by the communities that are already doing just fine, and the communities that were hurting most from all that air pollution, well, they're still hurting. This isn't just an imaginary city, this is the story of real cities all across the US where people might live in the very same area code, but their race, ethnicity, or wealth and income bracket causes them to experience wildly different quality of air, water, and life. In fact, it can even mean that they also experience different deaths. That's how serious this stuff is. This kind of inequity expands far beyond cities, too. Rural areas are full of commercially valuable resources like oil and coal, and they're also home to indigenous and low-income communities. But when those resources are extracted, those communities don't see any of the money, and they end up with all the air and water contamination that's left over from the extraction. And we even see this injustice on a global level, like in small island nations that are forced to directly confront the consequences of rising sea levels, but haven't played any significant role in the industries that are causing climate change. These peoples are sometimes forced to flee their homes because their land is literally going underwater. But the very states that did play a hand in creating climate change don't have migration policies to accommodate them. So when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about how we can try to break down and reimagine a system that's built up on these inequities. A system where those who are already disadvantaged because of their race and economic status are made poorer because they're unable to profit from the resources that the world depends on, and are made sick or worse by the environmental contamination that comes with extracting those resources. Social inequities are intimately tied to the environment. That's why social justice is an environmental issue too.
So one might assume that this kind of environmental justice movement was born in a state like California or Massachusetts, but it actually began right here in North Carolina. So we can be proud of the fact that our state was where the environmental justice movement began. And it started in the late 1970s, and it began with a chemical company that was dumping toxic waste along the roadside in 15 counties of rural North Carolina. So they would have these trucks go in the middle of the night and dump toxic waste along the roadsides instead of properly disposing of it. And in 1981, the president of the company was charged and went to jail, but they still needed to figure out where to put all this toxic waste that had been dumped along the sides of the road. So they had to pick a site to create a landfill, and that site was Warren County, which at that point was the lowest income and largest minority population in the state. And what they did is they dug up all the soil along these roads where the toxic waste had been dumped, and they transported it, you can see in this video and this picture, in these trucks to the landfill in Warren County. So in 1982, there were huge protests there, people lying on the road, hundreds of people were arrested, and unfortunately they weren't successful at stopping this landfill from being built, but they did spark this movement that led to a lot of environmental action and justice for minority groups. So I think it was in 2004, they were able to dismantle the landfill and decontaminate it. But this is where the history of the environmental justice movement began, in Warren County, North Carolina. So in 1994, President Clinton signed an executive order basically writing in environmental justice into law. So ensuring that any environmental policy that was created, any federal law and practice did not harm disadvantaged communities. And also mandated that some federal funding go towards environmental projects like remediation of contaminated areas. So there's another short video on the history of environmental justice following these Warren County protests.
Nationally, the facilities where we dump our garbage and process dangerous chemicals tend to be located in poor and minority communities. The people who live there have little or no protection from the industries around them, and things could get worse. So there's this idea of environmental justice. It's pretty simple. Communities shouldn't be forced to deal with more pollution because they belong to a certain race, national origin, or income bracket. Yet America has struggled over the years to implement any serious policy that actually protects these communities. So let's lay out the ways the government has failed them.
We will not allow Warren County to become a dump site.
The fight for environmental justice took off in 1982, when residents of Warren County, North Carolina mounted mass demonstrations against a plan to dump contaminated soil in a landfill in their community. The EPA investigated 4 similar landfills in southern states and found that they were all located in Black or low-income neighborhoods. In 1987, the United Church of Christ Racial Justice Commission found that around the country, hazardous waste facilities were more likely to be located in mostly minority communities. Amid mounting proof, the federal government was forced to act.
George Herbert Walker Bush.
So in 1992, President George H.W. Bush founded the Office of Environmental Justice inside the EPA. 2 years later, President Bill Clinton signed an executive order requiring federal agencies to consider environmental justice in all of their policies, as well as extending civil rights protection to environmental discrimination. But Congress never passed a bill to make Clinton's executive order law. Then came George W. Bush. His administration shifted the focus of the Office of Environmental Justice from protecting low-income and minority communities to all people, leaving vulnerable populations without a federal environmental advocate.
80% of New Orleans, including much of downtown, is underwater.
Under Bush, many environmental civil rights claims were rejected or delayed for years. In 2009, after President Barack Obama's election, his administration recommitted to environmental justice.
Generally speaking, in this country, a lot of environmentally problematic facilities tend to be located in places where poor folks live.
Yet, during the 2 years Democrats controlled the House, the Senate, and the White House, they didn't file a single bill focused on strengthening environmental justice protections. Passing major environmental legislation faded further when Republicans took control of Congress in the 2010 midterm elections. Now, President Donald J. Trump is making good on his vow to weaken the EPA.
Environmental protection, what they do is a disgrace. Every week they come out with new regulations. They're making it impossible.
Who's going to protect the environment?
We'll be fine with the environment. We can leave a little bit.
This budget, a 31% cut to the EPA, $2.6 billion cut away from the EPA. That's what the president wants.
As the EPA loses funding and regulations are rolled back, vulnerable communities may very likely fall through the cracks. I'm Talia Buford. I'll be covering these communities and digging into systemic environmental injustice.
I do want to acknowledge that ProPublica is a slightly left-leaning source, so just keep that in mind. But I thought the sequence of events and the video did a good job at just highlighting the important milestones in the environmental justice movement. So it's important to remember, too, that when we're talking about environmental justice, we're not just talking about communities within the United States. We are also focusing on communities around the world, developing countries and groups of people that live in places that might be burdened by environmental issues like landslides and flooding and drought more than others. It's especially problematic when countries that have tight regulations within their borders do business practices in other countries with less regulations. So, for example, in this case, in 1984 in Bhopal, India, there was an American-owned pesticide company called Union Carbide that had a factory in Bhopal, and there was an explosion and 40 tons of toxic gases leaked into the air, and 3,000 people died within the first 24 hours. In total, there's an estimated, it's hard to determine how many exactly died linked to this event, but it's estimated that at around 15,000 deaths can be attributed from it based on exposure to toxic chemicals and different related issues. And in other problems that happen is when one company gets bought out by another, like this one in United Carbide was purchased by Dow Chemical in 2001, that the changeover slowed all the compensation procedures. And even so, the victims were only paid under $500 for this tragedy. And 30 years later, there's still chemicals that have not been cleaned up, and there's still people that are suffering from miscarriages and suffering from long-term health issues, cancers, and things like this. Another environmental justice issue relates to plastic waste, especially in how we have to ship it to other countries instead of dealing with it here. It's not like we are just dumping it there. We're paying them to do it. So you could say, well, they could refuse they could refuse the money. But why are they accepting the money? It's because this is the only way that they can get it. But then they have to deal with the consequences for their environment and their people in terms of the impacts of this plastic waste. So I think this graph from 2020 is pretty telling. You can see that this shows the percentage of the global population and percentage of solid waste. So the MSW means municipal solid waste. And you can see that, okay, so China is the country with the highest, China and India are the countries with the highest global population and also produce the highest percentage of global waste, solid waste. But then if you look at the United States, we have a much, much smaller population, the blue bar right here. And we produce about over 2 times more waste in terms of percentage than our population percentage. So you can see much lower population, much higher waste. And compared to other countries, the amount of waste we produce is pretty crazy. So it's very hard to visualize what 1 billion pounds of waste is, plastic waste. So this little analogy down here, I thought was useful. The United States exported 1.37 billion pounds of scrap plastic in 2020. And that's the equivalent of 1.37 billion baby blue whales, great big whites, or a pop-up camper. So if you can picture what 1.3 billion pop-up campers are and how much they weigh, visualize that as plastic, and that's how much we're exporting to other countries. Why is the environmental risk higher in vulnerable communities? Well, there's many different reasons for this. So here are some of them. Developing countries and lower income communities face greater disease rates due to overcrowding, lack of access to clean water, lack of sanitation systems, and lack of quality health care. If you look at these numbers, it's pretty amazing to think about that 800,000 people worldwide don't have access to clean water, and 2.5 billion don't have access to proper sanitation systems. There's also more pollution around vulnerable communities because there's less regulation and there's less money to litigate issues. The people live in older or cheaply built homes, which comes with a whole array of health issues like black mold, toxic chemicals coming off paint and carpets, and the structures are also inadequate. So if there are storms or there's earthquakes, like these are going to be the first structures that are going to suffer. And obviously now a huge issue, everything related to climate change is going to affect low-income communities the most. And we will look at much more related to this when we do the climate change chapter. So I wanted to go through 3 case studies related to environmental justice. The first one was the Love Canal case study in the 1950s to the 1980s. And this related to Hooker Chemical Company, which was dumping barrels of toxic waste in this canal that was built. It was originally built as a recreation canal. So it was in Niagara Falls, in the American part of the Niagara Falls, in the community Niagara Falls, New York. And someone had built, a development company had built a canal with the thought that it would be used for swimming and for boating and things like that. And then it never got used for that and was just left abandoned. And this Hooker Chemical Company started dumping barrels of toxic waste and burying them in this canal. And the land was sold, they were buried, and then the land was sold for $1, which is very symbolic, to a school board. and houses were built around it. So there was a school built right on the canal, and then there were houses built around them, and these were low-income houses. So at one point, there started being this gurgling sounds and the sludge coming out of the yard in these houses that were built around the school, and it contaminated the toxic sludge contaminated the groundwater, contaminated the soil, and it just started coming out of all the pipes. And there were lawsuits, there were protests, people got moved to other places. But 30 years later, the lawsuits are still going on. And at one point, they actually tried to bring people back, saying that they had cleaned it all. So why is environmental risk higher in vulnerable communities? In low-income communities and developing countries, they face, for example, a greater disease rate. And this is due to overcrowding. You have many people living packed together. There's also lack of access to water and sanitation systems. So almost 2 billion people worldwide don't have access to clean water or proper sanitation. And they also have lack of access to quality health care. There's also more air pollution. There's less regulation in general in developing countries. And there's also less money for litigation when something happens. If there's a factory if you live in a neighborhood that's near a factory that has a high rate of pollution and putting all these toxic chemicals in the air, as a community, you might have less money to hire lawyers to make a case for protection against this. People with low income and minority communities also live in older or cheaply built homes, and these could have black mold. They might have toxic chemicals from old lead-containing paint or from carpets, and the structures themselves might be less stable because they are cheaply built, or they might be really old. So if there's any kind of extreme weather conditions like storms or floods, these houses are going to be the ones that are most heavily impacted. And obviously now climate change, all the impacts related to climate change, most of them are going to affect low-income communities the most. And we'll be talking more about that specifically when we do the chapter on climate change. So I wanted to go over 3 case studies related to environmental justice as examples. The first one is the one that happened in Love Canal, New York's upstate New York in the 1950s to 80s. And this happened in the United States part of Niagara Falls in a community called Love Canal, New York. And it happened because in the 1950s, the Hooker Chemical Company started dumping a bunch of toxic waste barrels in this empty canal. So there was a canal that some developer built with the intention of being used as a recreation canal, so kind of like a man-made river where people could swim and go boating, and it never actually got completed, so it was just abandoned, and the Hooker Chemical Company took advantage of it and dumped all these barrels of toxic waste into the canal and then buried them in the 50s. So in the 1970s, a couple of decades later, the people living in these houses around this canal, and there was actually also a school built right on top of this covered canal, they started seeing this toxic sludge coming out of their pipes, seeping into their basement. You can see pictures of the kids playing in the yard, and there's these bubbles coming out of toxic sludge. It had contaminated the soil. It had contaminated the groundwater, the drinking water. So there were a lot of protests, and the federal government came in to do tests, and they saw that there was that all this was contaminated, and that people were showing high levels of toxic chemicals in their blood. And they recommended everyone around the canal, so all the houses that were directly next to the canal, be evacuated. However, they didn't provide any funds for them to do that. So these people knew that they were living with this toxic waste. They couldn't do anything about it because they didn't have the income to relocate. So after many years of litigation and protests and pressure on the government, on President Carter, who was up for re-election, eventually the federal government provided the funds for the houses next to the canal to relocate. The same thing, there were people that lived in the second row houses or houses a little further down that also felt like they were being exposed to these toxic chemicals. So they had to fight really hard to eventually in the 1980s also get the money from the government to relocate. So total, I think it was of 700 families got relocated from this area. They found about 88 different chemicals buried underground, 11 of which were carcinogens. And this case is really important because it was the first EPA Superfund site. So a Superfund site, the Superfund was developed as a pot of money that provided emergency relief to cases where there was contamination, such as this. So it was money that the community could have access to immediately help stop the contamination or clean the area. And so on. And then after everything was clean, then they could, the government could go after the responsible party. But the main thing was to have money available that the government, the community could act quickly to either get people out or clean up the spill, the toxic spill, the acid mine drainage or whatever was affected. So this was the first Superfund site. These funds are really important, especially for vulnerable communities, low-income communities that don't have the money to do the soil testing, the blood testing, and to clean up the spill. So it's money that is readily available for that. There's about 400 super site funds around the country, and one of them is actually, the closest one we have is actually in Ashe County, which is an abandoned copper mine, an old copper mine that was having acid mine drainage, and the toxic waste was getting into people's wells. So that is still being dealt with. So that's considered a Superfund site that you can look up online. If you want to see what Superfund sites are near you, what you can do is go to the EPA Superfund sites page, and you can make the map bigger. Okay, and if we look at, let's go to North Cape to Boone. We know it's around here, and then we can see where the closest Superfund site is. So there's one here, for example. We're going to check it out what it is. And this is the Ore Knob Mine, okay? And this is in Ashe County, about 25 minutes away. And you can click on it, and it will tell you why it's on the Superfund site. And this was actually an abandoned mine. And it says that the issue of concern was that the sampling identified contamination due to this Ore Knob Mine. And if you go to Health and Environment here, it will tell you why. So it says, investigators have identified contamination of surface water, groundwater, sediment, and soil that could potentially harm people in the area. Resulted from historic mining practices and impacted streams and rivers and also people's wells. Okay, and then if we go to cleanup activities, okay, so here it is. So high levels of metals, including copper, zinc, iron, arsenic, and mercury, which from the acid mine drainage. And it tells you a little bit of history behind it and how they found the contamination and then what they've done since then. So there's quite a bit that has been done since then. But in 2015, they completed the investigation and determined that they needed a municipal water line to go from the town water to the residents that are near the ore because they couldn't use their wells anymore. And then the current status is still ongoing. It still hasn't issued the final cleanup plan. So this is, pretty worrying for these people since it's been going on. It was added in 2010, I think it was. So, sometimes it's like 12 years, 20, 30 years, and they're still cleaning up or determining how to clean up. And some of these projects are obviously huge, but you can imagine people that live nearby being concerned about it. So that's how to figure out what Superfund sites are near you. The second case I wanted to go over is that of Flint, Michigan, the water crisis that happened in 2014. And it happened because the city of Flint, to save money, decided to switch their drinking water supply from the treated Detroit water, which was coming from Lake Huron, to water from Flint River. And the Flint River has basically been an unofficial dump site for decades. You can picture how many car manufacturers and other factories are around Detroit. And so this water was much lower quality, contaminated, and people started complaining about it. Nobody listened. The majority of the population in Flint is African American, and they're also low income. After the water started coming out cloudy, some places it was coming out brown, like you can see this woman. There was a public outcry. Politicians were still denying it. They were going on camera with like a cup of water, like drinking it, that kind of stint. And eventually they got, because of the public pressure and the media, they got institutions like Virginia Tech to analyze the water, and there was much wider blood toxic level screenings. And they found that people had much higher levels of mercury in the blood, especially children. And because of this, the EPA got involved. And eventually there was a lot of pressure in the government and funds were provided to the Flint government to give people clean water, drinking bottles of water, and to provide a solution to the water supply problem. And it's still going on. The EPA got involved in 2016, and this is still being dealt with. So you can see how long some of these cases last, and how much the public pressure really has an impact on these. Sometimes it really takes everyone getting together and fighting for it. The third case I wanted to go over is the impact of flooding and other climate change related issues on coastal communities. There's many coastal communities that are populated by vulnerable people or low income. These are places that flood easily, and the houses are usually going to be much more exposed to the elements. And unless it's in places that are particularly attractive, like, the Outer Banks or Miami and stuff like that, where there's the oceanfront property is really expensive, these communities are going to get very little help in terms of climate remediation and help strengthening their structures and dealing with flooding and things like that. So one issue is that when there is, for example, a seawall being suggested, like in Charleston. So Charleston is one of the places that is being flooded and will have the biggest impact of sea level rise over the next decades. And one idea that is always discussed is the idea of building a seawall. And there is the United States Corps of Engineers has designed this $2 billion seawall project that basically goes around Charleston. And if you've been to Charleston, you will know that this area, you can see it on the map, where the seawall is projected to be built, is the area that is where the historic homes are, the really expensive homes are. It's the downtown, it's the tourist, where all the tourists go. So there's a lot of value in this area, but this is the only area that is being protected by the seawall. If you go further out, which is where the more vulnerable communities live that can't afford to live in downtown Charleston, so places like North Charleston or Mount Pleasant and other places around the coast down here, there's no seawall protecting them. So the issue is always, where do you start the seawall and where do you end it, and which communities are you going to leave out? And the seawalls are really just a band-aid anyway, because how high would you have to build it for it to really have an impact? These are when we're talking about environmental justice and what resources are we providing these communities. Two common issues that have been identified in environmental justice cases are the fact that disadvantaged communities lack the resources to fight for environmental benefits and to get justice when they're exposed to environmental hazards. And the other issue is that governments are much slower to react or respond when environmental justices are brought to light. So one very clear example of this was in a few years ago when Hurricane Maria struck Puerto Rico. And this is Puerto Rico, is a U.S. territory. And it took weeks and even months for people to get drinking water, to get power back, to get help clearing the debris. And this is U.S. territory. Like, this would not happen in Charlotte. Can you imagine a place like Charlotte being hit with a hurricane and the government taking weeks to provide drinking water to the communities or to bring back power, it's really unheard of. So these are the two common issues that are often seen in environmental justice cases: the lack of resources for litigation and to demand the right for funds for recovery, and the fact that governments are much slower to react when it happens in these communities than when it happens in wealthier, white communities or in places that have a high property value. So what actions can we take to promote environmental justice? Well, there's many, and hopefully you will be a part of some of these. So a lot of the actions center around urban planning efforts. So make sure that homes are being built in areas and in ways that are going to resist future hazards. Also making sure that the areas that are identified as being at risk because of environmental and other hazards are provided funds for relocation. So that this is particularly important in a lot of these coastal communities where it's just not going to get any better. It's only going to get worse. And there's nothing you can do to protect these homes. And then the only real solution is to provide funds for people, for these communities to relocate inland. Other actions that promote environmental justice are things like antibiotics in animal feeds, preventing the use of those, the widespread use of those, because that causes antibiotic resistance. Restoring wetlands, because they provide a buffer for flooding because of climate change. Providing quality access to education and healthcare. Ensuring amenities like parks are available for everyone, so not just for a few people, but making sure everyone has access to parks, everyone has access to good schools, to good hospitals, to things like fresh produce, avoiding areas that are what are called food deserts, where you don't have access to fresh produce, and also making sure that education provides widespread vaccination efforts and the funds to vaccinate people. So which of these best explains what environmental justice is then? Based on what we've covered as a little recap, which of these best explains what it is? Is it giving the environment a voice? Is it advocating for the protection of the environment? Ensuring that no community bears more environmental burdens and less benefits than others? Or ensuring that environmental policy is enforced? Hopefully by now you know that the answer is the third one, even though we absolutely must make sure that we protect the environment and that policy is enforced. When we're referring to the definition of environmental justice, this refers to groups of people having access to environmental benefits and not being burdened by environmental hazards and issues more than others. And there are many opportunities for you to get involved at the town level and also at the state level, at the university level. And that's that for this lecture. There's a couple other resources that I've added that are optional if you want to check them out.